an understanding of other people's interest and perspective, which is a validation of the significance of the material. As a matter of fact, James, I don't know if you kind of putting you on the spot, but you just wrote a letter the other day saying that you just got, you might say, an aha sort of reaching a plateau of understanding. Would you care to explain that based on a beginning of just what? Sorry, what did you say your name was? Starting with an R.
Randall.
Randall. Interesting. The only thing that stuck in my head, it starts with an R. I couldn't quite grab it. Okay. But James has been listening to this stuff for many years as well. Do you mind, James, if I ask you to explain that?
Well, I'll just talk about it briefly, but because I'm still researching, I've come across a couple of other things, and I want to make sure that when I do talk about it, it's really clear. But when I was looking at the association between the tabernacle and the Aleph Tav, I started to see a little bit more. And I mean, Eric talks about the association with all the different patterns throughout Scripture, how many relative patterns there are to the Mishkan. And I started to look at the elements, and actually, when I look at the Mishkan now, all I see is the Messiah, because the journey through from the outer gate to the Holy of Holies is literally all of the things that the Messiah did to represent who he is and what he came for. And I'd never seen that before, because I was always looking at the details, always going, okay, well, the Mishkan means this, and this is what happens, and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden I stood back, and I'm just sitting there going, holy crap, that's the actual life of the Messiah right there. No wonder we're not allowed to change any of it. No wonder it had to be built exactly the way that it was shown in the kingdom. Because if we changed it, then it wouldn't be the Messiah anymore. And it wouldn't be the pattern of who he was. We would basically corrupt that image of who he's going to be. And for me, that was just that was amazing to finally see it after, I don't know what, 10, 15 years of looking at this stuff and finally seeing that picture in there. So the biggest thing that I've managed to look at in this study, something that's been done also multiple times, and Brad Scott talks about it, about the DNA in the word. And so I've been able to correlate the sequence of the Mishkan, but not just that, the entire Aleph Tav, to the nucleus and the structure of the nucleus within the DNA. And so now I want to find the patterns between the Tabernacle of Moses, the Temple of Solomon, and the Temple of Ezekiel, and pull all five of those things together, because I think there's a connection, a spiritual connection of our growth. That's what I think is there. I just have to be able to prove it. So.
Well, just for what that's worth, as long as you bring up the Ezekiel 42, 43.
Yeah, I just was reading through it. It starts at Ezekiel 40, and I think it goes to about 44. And that's all.
There's an interesting phrase that I wanted to just bring real quick to attention.
Okay.
It's in 42, might be 43. Well, anyway, he says, this is the teaching regarding the temple. This is the way it's translated in English. All around Saviv, Kadosh, Kodashim, all around the mountain. This is the teaching regarding the temple. And so one thing I found is that whenever Yahuwah says something and then he repeats it, it's very significant. A lot of times you'll see one word, Shema, Shema, and maybe a slight spelling difference, and it's, well, you should really pay attention. That's the way it's translated. So they don't necessarily say hear, hear, or listen, listen, guard, guard, shamar, shamar. But I heard a guy do a talk many years ago, gave a sermon that was this secret code in the Bible that whenever something is repeated, it's a clue that, yes, this is Yahuwah speaking and that it's really important. But this is almost like a bookend. He says, this is the teaching regarding, and I think the word isn't temple, but it's hakal, I believe. I don't have my
Yes,
quote in front of me. I'd have to go get it. And then he makes a statement.
It kind of stands out, that word, because you're going like, wait a second, that's I haven't seen that before, that word.
Well, that you could say that's its own study, but he gives a sentence, then he gives a statement, and then he repeats the sentence. So they're almost like pointers at this thing in the middle, which is Saviv Saviv Kadosh Kodashim. And it's like, it's Saviv Samik Bet Yod Bet is translated all around, and it's used a number of other places, but then Bet is a gateway or entrance. And so the month of Aviv, springtime, Aleph Bet Yod Bet. So then you look at a similar spelling, Samik Bet Yod Bet. Well, if Aleph Bet Yod Bet is springtime, because Bet or Bet Yod Bet is a gateway or entrance, Samik is an engineered structure. So what's Samik Bet Yod Bet? And I'm saying this because this is part of the study of the construction of the language. So if you say, if Aleph Bet, the word means father, but it's also springtime or verdure, or having this powerful interest, or this birth of verdure, like where you get the word verde, which is green in Spanish. So this bursting forth of green spring, youthful vigor in the month of springtime, then what's Samik Bet Yod Bet? There's a gateway to the engineered design. That's what a samik is, like a picture of the menorah, a picture of a mast of a ship, a picture of a skeleton. And so you could say, if we understand the skeletal engineering like the menorah, that's the doorway of what? It's a comprehension. This is the teaching regarding the, and then the word temple, if it's hayakal, it's hey Yod Kaf Lamed, but Yod Kaf Lamed literally as a word, 3 letters in alphabetic sequence order, means to have the power and capacity to contain it all and to prevail. So Yeshua going into the grave, he did it to accomplish coming out, but as a word, it means more than just that. So I'm just bringing it to your attention to contemplate, because in 2009, I was in Jerusalem reading through Ezekiel. I just felt like, hey, I should read Ezekiel. And I bumped into that verse, and I was sitting there looking at the old walls, the old part of the city, and thought, it says all around the mountaintop will be most holy. That's the way it's translated. Like, there's nothing holy here. There's nothing kadosh. These are walls built by infidels who was trying to take over the city. And there's these Islamic minarets, and there's these walls built by Saracens and Crusaders and Romans, and way down deep, they unearthed some stuff from various other Jews that had built walls, and there was, rocks that were thrown by a catapult and this and that. And it's like, in fact, even the streets Yeshua walked were 30 feet below modern surface. And it's like the only way to make this mountaintop kadosh would be to somehow bulldoze the whole thing and get down to, before the Jebusites were even there, which isn't going to happen unless the place is, hit with some sort of device to take it back down to bedrock. But what I'm saying is that, is it talking about that mountain, or is it talking about something else? And when it says Hahar, Hey Resh, the mountain, Hey Resh also means to be pregnant or to be something noticeable. So it opened up this, that was back in 2009, it opened up this whole other consideration, which I've been kicking around all these years in my back of my mind. It's like, this is the teaching, Saviv, Kadosh, Kodashim, around and around, which is one reason why I made the shields in this spiral pattern. That was what was behind that. And there's something about going around and around this spiraling.
Kind of like a DNA strand.
Yes. So just to say, there's more to that stuff, but I would encourage you in the pursuit of the looking at a correlation between the Mishkan and the temples. There's stuff there, but just even finding a verse like that, I think, is a big deal. And so when people do a study, when you read it in Hebrew, when you notice things like that, it's like, hey, wait a minute, look closer.
We did a teaching on Ezekiel 43 back in January. I put a link to it in the chat. So.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, back in January, I think I was down in at the Mountain Air 7 folks, right? I think that's when I did that particular teaching. I was down in California with Mountain Air 7.
Yeah, no, I'll look at that, because that's actually when you mention that phrase, if you associate it with DNA, that actually speaks really volumes. If we look at the tabernacle, and then we look at the temple, and then we look at Ezekiel's, which hasn't been built, but if we look at that progress and we think about DNA, we think about getting back to where we were in the garden before the corruption, before.
Well,
what if the potential is that Ezekiel's temple is actually a representation of our fleshly spiritual growth, our DNA increasing back to where it was?
Let me bring this point out. Somebody just said, when will we start the actual talk? I'm suggesting that this is what the actual talk is about, in that the subject today, one reason I'm using the same background and all here is to link the two talks together from last week and this week. We were talking about the word ayin shin resh, osher, is the word 10, and it means to make wealthy or rich. And then the word debarim is, it's called 10 Commandments, but you might say matters or topics or concepts so you could say the 10 Commandments is better called the 10 concepts by which to be enriched. And what we were going to talk about today is starting off with just the first 3 words of what's in Exodus 20. It's also in Deuteronomy 5. And here, I'll hold it up. It's the first 3 words are Anoki Yahuwah Eloheka. And it's translated, I am Yahuwah your Elohim. And so this business of DNA is very pertinent. The business of, well, what about that temple? He never actually authorized or came up with the idea, hey, David or Solomon, why don't you build a temple for me? He actually did come up with build the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and he showed the plan, the Tabanit, to Moshe, and then empowered with skill and, you might say, the creative mind to Bezalel and Aholiab in Exodus 25 thereafter to build the Mishkan. And then what Ezekiel saw was a vision of this third temple, and I've heard people discuss it and say, is it one that's even going to be built? Is it just, is these 5 chapters in Ezekiel just for some other purpose? It hasn't been on the face of the earth, and will it ever? Nobody knows. Is it going to be kind of in this new kingdom era? Nobody knows. It's all speculation. And Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, was it Zerubbabel's temple? Was the one that when Ezra and Nehemiah came back from being in Babylon, the people were supposed to build the temple and rebuild the city, and then they put their efforts towards building their houses. And then all of a sudden, apparently Elohim got kind of upset with them and said, hey, you're building your own houses and you're not working on mine. And, what's up with that? And so they kind of got in trouble for that. But even though there's no place really where Elohim says, hey, I want a big fancy temple. He did condone what Solomon's efforts did. And then I think it's in 2 Chronicles 20, I think it is, where Solomon is praying and he says, oh, will you please turn your face and give regard to your people whenever they turn towards this temple, which is why Jews pray facing east, and it's like, well, yeah, but what if you're some other place in the world? What does east have to do with it? Well, the word east is kuf dalet mem, which also means ancient, similar to the word paleo. And you're not necessarily facing Jerusalem if you're facing east, but it's more of a concept of facing, because for the most part, we think of the Israelites being thrown into dispersion and captivity, being driven westward. And so facing east is looking back where we came from. But a lot of them went east to the Orient and went north up to the certain people group. It slips my mind all of a sudden. The starts with an S. The Scythians were from in the Saxons, it was believed that was Isaac's sons, and it went up through the Caucasus Mountains and hence Caucasians. But then there's Black Hebrew Israelites who claim that, went down into Africa. So they went all over the place, and they were all different races. But to think that only those that went west have to look back east, I think there's something wrong with that. But nevertheless, that's what's used. And I'm just saying this for reference for people who maybe don't know these things. That's why I'm bringing mention to different concepts like this. But the phrase Anoki Yahweh Eloheka, I am Yahweh your Elohim, we're going to look at those three words, and identity is maintained by DNA. So your study, James, of DNA, did you want to maybe explain why you think the DNA is particular and what that has to do with the temple and or the Mishkan and or the alphabet?
Well, I'll just briefly, it was probably about 10 years ago that my wife and I were doing studying biology in college. And I remember sitting there one day and we were actually looking at this picture of the structure of a nucleus. And even back then, because I've always been fascinated by the tabernacle, and I remember sitting there looking at this picture, and it just literally hit me. I'm going, holy crap, that's the same thing as the tabernacle. The form and the function of all the different elements that make up the nucleus have the same form and function, in a sense, just different shapes, but it's the same function as the different elements within the tabernacle. And I thought that was really unique when we consider that Yahweh says right in the beginning, I'm going to make you in my image. And it's like, well, what does that really mean? Well, here it is. He's basically taken his ID and stamped it on every cell within our bodies. So, it's like, and he's going to tabernacle within us. Again, the correlations within scripture and those things there, that's what fascinated me. And I thought with this study, Aleph Tav comes first, and then man. So then there's the cells, then that's the DNA, and then we get the tabernacle, and so it was kind of like this progression that I started thinking about, and it just kind of got hooked on the idea of, can I prove this by scripture, and can I see it, and for what is it really talking about? What is this progression? Because patterns throughout scripture everywhere. So is there significant pattern here that tells us a little bit more than just saying, okay, here's the building, here's the tent, is there something of some sort of progression that it's actually revealing to us if we can see it? I don't want to make something up, but I just want to say, does it exist?
Well, let me just say this one part, and then we should open up with a word of prayer, Kurt. But based on what James is saying about noticing a pattern in the design of a cell, let me compare that with the Mishkan pattern in the design of the Garden of Eden. Just so you know the type of thing he's referring to. So let me see if I can draw it on a piece of paper here. Picture Eden itself like and I know that Andrew Hoy in Project 314 is round, but for the sake of reference, I'm just going to do the rectangle thing. Let's call this Eden, the het, the big white fence. Then the covered place is the garden in Eden. So Eden and the Garden of Eden is two different things. And remember, when Cain got kicked out of Eden, he went outside to the land of Nod, which is wandering, which is all over, like out in the darkness, someplace that's not Eden. And it says that Elohim put man in the garden, and there was, you could say, the tree of life. Let's say it was in the Kadosh Kodashim, the separated place. And then, so if we have a menorah and a table of showbread and the altar of incense inside here, outside was the headwaters of 4 rivers, well, the place of the laver. So if Adam was hanging around in here and there was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that he wasn't supposed to eat of, he was, there was 2 other things that was going on in here. I'm trying to think of. He was supposed to tend the garden
and name the animals.
And I thought about this like back in 2004 when I was first looking at this Mishkan pattern. I think that this lines up with Samik Ayin Pei, and I believe it was like tend the garden, do what you're supposed to, and then name the animals and relate with Elohim. And excuse me, it is off the cuff, and I don't recall how I locked those in. I'd have to go back and look at it. But the point is, when Adam got kicked out of the garden, he was taken back to the place of the earth that he was taken from, which is this area out here, the barbecue grill, and that's where he was told to start farming. So the interesting thing about the barbecue grill having the lines like a grill, which lines up with the kaf, furrows in the field, and the lamed being the hoe that you have to till the soil with. So Adam was kicked back out to this place, but when Cain killed Abel, he was sent outside in wandering. But if this is the 4 headwaters of the rivers lining up with the laver, I'm just saying there seems to be the same conceptual pattern. And so when you're noticing a conceptual pattern in the cell, it's that type of a thing. And then it's a matter of going back and reading and plugging in the elements. Like if you have the 2 trees, and then he was supposed to tend the garden, that I think that would line up with the menorah, the samik, which is like do justly, lining this with beatitudes, do justly. Well, that's actually Micah 6:8. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with Elohim. Those 3. But he was told to tend the garden, name the animals, get along with his wife.
And guard, and he was also told to guard it.
To guard it. Well, tend and guard would be the same word. Hey, Mark. So anyway, we could talk about that more detail, but I'm just trying to bring up the point that the layout of the Garden of Eden seemed to be you might say, this mirror image, the same type of a thing as the design of a cell. Any biological cell has that same essence or structure.
Right.
But anyway, did Kurt or you or somebody want to open up with a word of prayer here? Or hey, Gillen is here too.
Hi.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Lynn is joining us. Yay. Haven't seen her in forever. She's been house hunting. I think she found one. Did you find a house?
Almost. We're still in the deal.
Great.
Bonjour.
So I just wanted to encourage people that if you get kicked out or you get lost and can't figure out how to get back here, go to the YouTube videos in the description. I'm trying to make sure that I put the link to the Skype in every video. So you can find your way back here. And then all you have to do is when it says join group or join call, just click it. It's a green little shaped like a pill. And that's all you have to do. And then I will go through and mute everybody because the noise gets to be a bit much. So if you want to talk or add conversation, just unmute yourself. And then I just wanted to go into the idea of, we're talking about the 10 Commandments. If you were on last week's call, it was a 3.5 hour teaching. And then we went for another 4 hours talking about the 10 Commandments after. And then we're going to talk about the 10 Commandments again. And, I think if we were talking to the normal people out there, they'd be like, "Why? How can you talk about the 10 Commandments for 9-10 hours straight?" And, well, there's a lot of information here. And, The interesting thing to me is that we said at the beginning, and Eric and I talked about this week, and he asked me to make sure I bring it up, is that the first commandment isn't actually a commandment, but is it? Is it Yahuwah bringing the idea that he is our Elohim into consciousness in front of 3 million people? Think about Abraham, think about Yitzhak, think about Yaakov when he introduced himself to them individually, right? 12 people go into Egypt, 3 million come out, an entire nation. And for the first time into the consciousness of Israel that exists as a nation, he introduces himself not only through Moshe, but in writing, declaring who he is into the consciousness of the entire universe. And I find that just absolutely fascinating. And you're talking about the Garden of Eden, and to me, it looks exactly like him saying, let there be light. Let me be Yahuwah of Israel. And I find it fascinating. And I don't think we can talk about these matters enough. And there's actually people out there and a voice out there saying, these things are done away with. Well, guess he's not talking to you when he says, I am your Elohim. There is no other. And if you don't want to be a part of this kingdom, well, you have the option to bow out. But there's darkness on the outside. This is where the light is. This is where the light is. So yeah, we can go another 4 hours of talking about the 10 matters for sure. And even after we're done recording, we're still going to talk about it. So if you want to join, I'm going to have a link in the description. We pray, we talk. And this is Israel, man. I am staring at my brothers and sisters, and I couldn't be happier. This community, we talked about, I'm sorry, I'm going to go on for a second if you don't mind. We talked about the statue in Daniel. And what's the statue? What's that stone? Not hewn of hand. And we figured it out. We discovered in the Hebrew that it's Israel rising. We have to come together. Come together, Israel. Come together. In the name of Yahuwah. Learn his words. Do his thing. Come together. Let's not be apart anymore. And we're going to knock that statue out together. It's the rebirth. It's the Bob man inspiring the Resh man to rise again. And this is the fascination of Eriktology. And if this doesn't just spur you to just want to know more about it, gosh. I used to think about, I'll get off my soapbox in a second, but Yahuwah hardening the heart of Pharaoh. And it just dawns on me this week when I'm putting these videos together, doing all the editing. When he's hardening the heart of Pharaoh, he's picking a fight. He's picking a fight with him. He's prodding him. That's what he's doing. If you've ever dealt with a bully, and think about it, he drowned the entire the army of Egypt. Well, before he drowned that entire army, you know what? Egypt drowned an entire generation of Hebrews. He drowned them. Mishpat and Zadikah, man. So that's our Elohim. Those are the long arms that are extended on our behalf. And we're afraid of some people trying to stick a vaccine in us. Why? Well, he's picking a fight again. Yahuwah's picking a fight with these people, thinking that we're dainty and we're They don't know the power back in us. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox and we're going to talk about these 10 matters again and again and again. And if you think they're done away with, best of luck on what's coming. All right, I'm going to pray. Thank you, Yahuwah, for my brothers and sisters. Thank you for Israel. Thank you for remembering us like you said you would. Thank you for waking us up. Thank you so much for these faces, these beautiful faces and hearts that just want to know and do your thing again. Father, Moshe said we would come back. A future generation, we'd walk away and then we'd come back, and here we are. And here we are, Father. Thank you for remembering us. In Yahuwah's name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Just to jump right in to the concept, and the idea was to be able to have you all discuss this without necessarily just being only me. But I'm just going to explain something about the meanings of these words to start with. Anoki Yahuwah Eloheka. So please feel free to be part of the conversation here. If you look at the word Anoki, it's simply translated I am. And for what it's worth, there's two other phrases that are translated I am. This middle phrase is Ehye Asher Ehye, which is I am that I am. And you notice there's a difference between this word Ehye and the first word Anki. And then there's this other phrase down here that says Ani Yahweh. Well, Ani, that's Aleph Nun Yod, means I am. So it kind of sets up a little bit of a problem. The story in the gospel when Yeshua was dragged before Caiaphas and he said, I am, all of a sudden Caiaphas said, that's it. He spoke the inutterable name. Now we get to kill him. And Caiaphas ripped his high priestly garments. And it's like, wait a second. I thought that the inutterable name was Yahweh, not one of these other three words that mean I am. Yahweh doesn't mean I am. Yahweh, as we talked last week, is the masculine memorial name. And it doesn't mean I am. It means he causes it to exist. I am is either Anki, sometimes pronounced Anoki, or it's Ehye, or it's Ani. And then you could say another word that's self-referential is actually spelled Aleph, Vav, Tav, Yod, which is Oti, which means me, or it might be Aleph, Tav, Yod, which is also self-referential. So here you could say there's 5 words which someone might say in the Hebrew language referring to themselves, but they're not Yod-He Vav-He. Yod-He Vav-He, it's the interesting thing about that word is that it starts with the letter Yod, which is third person reference, meaning he will. If it starts with an Aleph, it's first person reference, meaning I am or I will. And then the weird thing about Yod-He Vav-He is it means it's the Shem Zakar, as we mentioned last week, that Zakar, Zion, Kaf, Resh, means masculine, but Yod-He Vav-He has the He suffix, which is feminine. Why would he do that? Why would he say that the masculine Shem Zakar has a feminine suffix? What's going on? You know, let me say one thing for what it's worth, is that I was watching last week's talk, you know, checking it out, make sure that there's no mistakes. And every once in a while, I will make a mistake. I'll say the word prefix instead of suffix, or I'll say the word kuf or kaf instead of kuf, which I did last week. And instead of making every little correction and plugging it onto the videos, which we've tried to do a few times, I'm just letting people know there's a slip of the tongue, a misspeaking. Please be on your guard to know better. In other words, if I'm just talking off the top of my head because nothing's written out, and I say cough and it's really koof, or koof and it's really cough, or prefix and it's really suffix, or vice versa, you got to listen. But let me say this also. Last week, Colin held up a book with the title. He actually sent it to me and I read it this week. And just to give you warning, that book has, I think, 5 Hebrew words written in modern Hebrew in it. 4 of the words are misspelled or misreferenced. Why would the guy do that? Didn't the guy who wrote that book double check before he put that book to print? And one of the words is Yod-He Vav-He. He has Vav-He Vav-He. Now, if somebody didn't know and they were going to use his book as a reference of, that's how you write the Hebrew words, and they copy it, it's wrong. Only you don't know if you don't know. There was one guy, I was at a restaurant a couple years ago, and the waiter had a tattoo on his arm, and it was Hebrew, modern Hebrew. And I said, "Oh, what's that?" And he says, "Oh, that's the sacred name." And I looked at it, it's like, no, it's not. It's like, yeah, it is. That's the Yod He Vav He written in modern Hebrew. And it's like, I don't know who did that tattoo, but he made a mistake. It's not Yod He Vav He. It's like either the tattoo artist didn't know or the guy that got the tattoo didn't know. And he's trying to be, yeah, I got the Almighty's name on my arm. But, you know, just so people are aware of what's going on. From what I understand, the Jews consider it to be profane to even write the sacred name on a piece of paper and have that piece of paper drop to the floor. You've now profaned it, or even worse, to throw it in the trash. You can't do that. So are they gonna tell you if you misspelled the name? No, it's in their interest that you misspell the name because now you're not profaning the real name. And so, okay, so anyway, and I'm saying this because last week we also talked about the 10 Commandments on the facade, that big, beautiful structure at Neve Shalom in Portland, Oregon on Dosh Road. And I believe I sent Kurt, or Sally sent Kurt, she found a photo of that just so you can see what we're talking about. And when I went there, and the librarian and some old guy that came to the door, neither one of them knew what those words mean. And we were saying, it's nobody's obligation to make sure that you know the truth other than your own. And don't count on some Jewish person telling you what the truth really is, because they're taught that if you're not Jewish, you're an infidel, heretic, goyim, or something. And you don't deserve to know, because you'll just pollute it by having their sacred words in your filthy mouth. So another friend, hey, Al, he called up a rabbi and was asking him about, hey, what's the right calendar? And the rabbi said, well, you know, we Jews have our own way of calculating the calendar, and you guys can do whatever you want. You know, it just doesn't matter. And Al was really wanting to know the real calendar. And it's like, listen, the Jews keep to themselves because everybody else hates them, rips off their stuff, and kills them. They're not going to tell you necessarily what their treasures are, nor do they have any obligation. What we are doing with this particular video series is actually unheard of. The book that Colin sent out was describing what happened in American history back in the 1700s, and even before that, that there's a great conflict between the Catholics and Protestants. And it goes back to the factor that the Protestants have this phrase in Latin, sola scriptura, which means only if it's written in scripture. Yeshua even said, it is written. So there's something about what's written. And for Kurt to say, listen, Yahuwah wrote with his finger on the tables of stone, authorizing literature. He spoke with his mouth words, and he made a point. He said, you didn't see any image, not male or female, no reptile, animal, bird, or fish, no images. And as we read in Deuteronomy 4 last week, Moshe said half a dozen times, when you come into the land and a few generations go by, somebody is going to blow it. Somebody is going to ruin everything by making an image of anything. Somebody's going to ruin everything by making an image of anything, something, whether it's a human or an animal, a fish or a bird or a reptile or even a bug, or no images. And so Miles Jones wrote a book called The Writing of God, and he was blasting the concept that Paleo Hebrew is sacred if the letters mean something. So to say that Aleph is an ox, Gimel is a camel, right there, you've got, though they're simple, they're images of animals. And therefore it's profane, it's a desecration. And Miles Jones he said this point at least a half a dozen times in this book. He said, Elohim said, don't have any graven images. And so if Elohim wrote with especially Paleo-Hebrew letters with his own finger, and here, this is an ox head, and this is a camel's head and neck, and or a camel's foot, if the Paleo meant something pictographically, he'd be breaking his own 10 commandments, which is proof that the Paleo-Hebrew means nothing. They're just phonics. Well, I completely disagree. So for then, you know, as James Ruff said, you're looking at this and you can see Yeshua's ministry in the thematic logograms, let's call them, of the Paleo-Hebrew letters. So when I say logograms, logo is where you get the word for speaking, and it's a Greek word logos. But we in English use the word logo as a, here, I'm going to hold up this can of coffee. That is a logo of the company. It's a picture that means something. It's a logo. Every image we draw, there's a maple leaf. It's a logo of Canada. Is it a graven image that we're bowing down to? No. So what I'm saying is a gram is also Greek, where you get the word grammar, and graphic, where you're drawing some sort of shape. To pick up some type of pen and draw a shape. Here's a graphic of a flower. Well, the Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Roman Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, they have what they call icons, which look like people, but they're kind of a distorted, odd-looking person. They intentionally draw them corrupted. They're kind of an artistic style that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. But from what I understand, what I've been told, they don't really look like a person. It's not like a real nice portrait, because then that would be a graven image. So they make them look kind of odd, distorted, kind of weird shaped fingers and elongated faces and all, so that they're intentionally not making a graven image. But it's an image of a person. What I'm saying is, where do you draw the line? For us to say Paleo-Hebrew letters mean something, it's because they're letters that not just represent phonic sounds or numbers and are put in a certain order, but the shapes actually can be read if you have a mind to know what they're saying. So I mentioned this a few weeks ago and I couldn't find it. I just found it the other day. Somebody wanted to know, this was on the headband of the high priest. And it was also to be written on the bells of the horses. If you look at next to the last verse of Zechariah, it says, Kadosh LaYahweh. So if you don't know what the letters mean, they're just letters with phonic sounds, consonantal sounds. But for example, this is where we in English get our letter Q. It's got a round thing and a vertical thing. Now, if I say, when Yeshua resurrected from the dead, he hung around for 40 days and then he floated up into the heavenlies, the round part, like the clouds, like the way up there in the sky. And then he's going to take his hosts in the future, like the gathering of all his forces, and come back and land right there on the Mount of Olives. So I can look at this picture shape, which is very simple. It's just not a complete circle, but it's a round thing and a straight thing. And I can say, well, that's a graphic shape. It's a logogram. It's a theme. It carries a theme, a concept that there's a rising up, there's an encircling, and then there's a pointing down. And the word kumi means rise up. It's in Isaiah, I think it's 60. And then it's hamakom. Kom means the place, which is to like dig a hole and plant a post. It's the same word, kufav mem, but the meaning is carried in the shape of that letter. So if you know what the shape of the letter means, you can read the shape of the letter. Does Miles Jones mean to say that letter shape means nothing? It's carried in the letter shape, the meaning of the letter. And I can go through every single letter and prove that point. This letter Lamed, you could say looks like a hoe. Some people turn it this way and say, well, that's a shepherd's crook. And we think of maybe the crook held up. It has the grabbing end, and then it has the poking end, the push-pull, a carrot and a stick, as it were. We could go through every single letter. So for us to say that in Deuteronomy 4, Israel got in really, really, really big trouble for making images, carved images. But what if you paint the image? Is that okay? So maybe the Orthodox are not the Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, maybe they're by saying, well, let's not paint something that looks like a person, but looks like a distorted person. Is that fair game? So with each one of these 10 commandments, which we're not necessarily going to get into, I'm just bringing up a point that once we say, hey, let's return to what Yahweh said, all of a sudden, yeah, but where do you draw the line? Because as soon as you say guess what? We've got a new covenant under grace, no lines, woohoo, we can do anything we want. Jesus died on the cross to forgive us for all of our sins, all of our mistakes, all of our bad intentions. There's no lines. As soon as we say, oh, wait a minute, yeah, these lines still matter. Oh, man, now you've set up. How do you make sure you're on this side of the line or that side of the line? Well, stay away from the line. But does that mean you can't? If I'm going to draw a simple figure there, the Christian fish, it's a fish. It's a symbol of a fish. I just broke the 10 commandments, made a graven image. Where do you draw the line? So somebody made a comment that said they wanted to talk about the calendar or the Sabbath day, or what do you do on the Sabbath day? And I'm telling you, this is all big trouble. This is all just asking for aggravation and people's attitudes to bump into each other, like being some carnival with the bumper cars, and you get in it, and the first thing you do is you aim for somebody to run into. That's what you do in the bumper cars. And that's what you do when you start talking about where do you draw the lines with the 10 commandments. Just asking for trouble. However, not only did Yahuwah write with his finger and speak with his mouth, he said, you will write these words on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And he had written words on the hatband of the high priest and on the bells of the horses. And I'm suggesting, as I talked about this once before, that the word bell is Zadi Lamed or Zadi Lamed Hey or Zadi Lamed Lamed. It means to provide shade or put something in an oven. A bell, it's a bell shape. So you could say a hat is that same word, but so is the cab of a car. And the word for horse is sus, samik vav samik, very similar to a fluttering flag, which is samik samik, or a moth that flutters around a light, at night on the porch light. Samik, something moving is samik samik. So is it a horse, a moth, a flag, or perhaps an automobile? So when it says in Zechariah that these words, Kadosh LaYahweh, will be written on the bells of the horses, we could extend that to say it would be written as a bumper sticker on the cabs of the cars. And the reason I made this version, see, this peels off, but I also have some that are made in static cling that you could just stick in the window of your automobile, so fulfilling the prophecy that one of these days that'll happen. And they're written, blue, purple, red with white and gold line thread, is because that's the embroidery colors that were on the high priest and on the embroidery fabrics of the Mishkan. Those are like the colors of the kingdom: blue, purple, red, gold thread, white linen. What I'm saying is that he was telling us to be literate. Something about literacy is not, if you don't learn Hebrew, you're going to burn in hell. Nobody ever said that. I've been accused of saying that. No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that apparently Yahuwah wants us to be able to read his language. We did a video, Ephraim's phylactery. Well, the word phylactery is that band that the Jews wear with that box, and there's stuff written in the box, and they also have the tefillin that wraps on their arm. And we talked about the meaning of those words before, Mountain Air 7 YouTube videos. I had a couple of those talks. But we were kind of joking around and saying, okay, the Jews wear the phylactery with that black band with the box. And then the Shinto priests in Japan also have a similar thing, only their box is round. But the hat band with the Paleo-Hebrew letters is, let's just call it Ephraim's phylactery. It's not Jewish, not Shinto, but it's those other 10 tribes scattered around the face of the earth who are having Yahweh's words just right there on your cranium. Just messing around. But he wants us to regard his words and to realize that the words are spelled with letters and every letter means something. And the reason I use this particular alphabetic letter font, I've said before, I'll say it again, I didn't find a particular artifact with these letter shapes. Back in 2005, I looked on the internet, wasn't really even happening with anything back then, but I looked on the internet, I looked in encyclopedias for every possible resource of ancient, original Semitic. Actually, Etruscan was, you might say, early Latin, and then there's the Thracian. And I looked at the most ancient alphabets I could find, and I picked out the letters that most clearly expressed what they mean. And then I compiled them as the set of 22. One person said they found an artifact with these letter shapes, which are pretty close, all but maybe one or two. But some of these are more aptly called Phoenician, not necessarily Proto-Sinaitic or it's like, listen, it doesn't matter whether it's the Phoenicians or the Etruscans or the Latins. This is a legitimate letter shape. It is ancient Hebrew, calling it Paleo-Hebrew. But the reason for using it is that the letter shapes, if you stare at them, this looks like an arm grabbing hand or an excavator arm with a bucket, on the front end of a tractor. Hey, this to reveal, hey, like light shining out through a window. And this is the reason I use this letter Vav, just so people know, and not the other one that is typically, is because in Daniel 12, I think it's verse 6 maybe, it says, so then the one who was above the waters of the river, dressed in white linen, held up his right hand and his left hand and swore by him that lives forever, there would be times and after time. Well, a man standing there with his hands up like this is almost the shape of this goblet. And the reason I use that Vav is because it speaks and ties into that verse in Daniel 12. And Daniel 12 is coded to the 22 letters. Just so you know. I'm not saying these letters are sacred and these letters are the most ancient form ever found. Nobody knows the most ancient form because whatever's been found almost looks like graffiti or some alien foreigner maybe who saw or heard that Moshe had developed this writing, and so they quickly scratched them on a rock and took them with them to some other part of the land of Canaan so that they could become literate. Miles Jones talks about that. His book's pretty good, but I disagree with the fact that these letters mean something. But just so you know where this is coming from. Here, let me real quick get back to talking about these letters. The word Anki, the Sumerians, they have this little glyph here, this round like a planet with wings and this god figure with a long robe and a beard that they call the Anunnaki or the Enoki. The Anunnaki, those are like these deified, it could be the planet Nibiru, but I think they called it Nibiru also, which comes from the word Hebrew, Neber. I live on Neber Road, interestingly enough. The letter Nun in front of Eber literally means start doing the Hebrew. It's like, gosh, we have all roads to live on. But the point is, that's why it's called Nibiru, and that's where we get the word neighbor. It's like the one on the other side of the property line coming into your zone. Why is the word Anaki or Anunnaki so similar to the word Anki? And that's the first word when Yahuwah was referring to himself. He says Anki, Aleph Nun Kaf Yod. Aleph prefix means I am or I will. Nun or the Yod suffix means myself. So then the two letters in the middle are Nun and Kaf. But if you look in the dictionary, Aleph Nun Kaf means plummet or plumb bob or straighten, vertical, perpendicular, ego, and it's why in Latin and English we use the letter I, the vertical shape of the letter I, you know, the straight line with the two little horizontal things on it. Just the letter I is Aleph Nun Kaf. So I could read the word Aleph Nun Kaf Yod as meaning I myself. But the word Kaf Yod, looking at the last two letters, means so, thus, because, if, when, while, therefore. It's also a burning or a branding, like a branding logo that like brand cattle with. Aleph Nun or Aleph Nun Hey means where. Kaf means you. So I could say, is this saying where are you? But Yod, it means my as a suffix. So is this word means where are you, my what? Where are you, my dog, my beloved, my friend? Where are you, my enemy? Where are you, my what? Nun Kaf Aleph, see, so if Yod is a suffix, you look in the dictionary, you look at Nun Kaf Hey and Nun Kaf Aleph and Nun Kaf Vav Yod. So Nun Kaf Aleph means beat or strike. And if you look at it also, Nun is a prefix very similar and related to Mem. And if you look at Mem Kaf Hey, it's the word Maka, which means to strike or beat. So you could say, I will strike myself. What? I will pound myself. Self-mortification or mutilation. Nun Kaf Hey, clapped, destroyed, defeated, wounded, killed, discounted. This is you would pronounce Nun Kaf as nick or knack. If you hit something, a piece of furniture with a tool and put nicks or dents in it. Well, if you go to buy an appliance and you go to the store and you want to go to the nick and dent department, you get it for a discounted rate. Same word, it means discounted, nicked, and dented. Nun Kaf Hey also means invalid, lame of feet, or a contrite spirit. If you look at Nun Kaf Vav Yod, it means low, base, or contemptible. But then if you look at Nun Kaf Vav Nun, the root of that is Kaf Nun. This is Nun Kaf. I'm just showing you that, I'm showing you part of the trouble with using the dictionary, but it's not just trouble. It appears at trouble at first, but all of a sudden it all opens up. Nun Kaf Vav Nun, Kaf Nun is where you get the word can, which means yes, or Ken, like Barbie and Ken, that the lady that named those two dolls was a Hebrew Jewish lady, from what I understand, and Ken means yes, but Nakon means correct, true, accurate, right, certain, clear, proper, prepared, and ready. Prepared and ready, well, that's a synonym with Ayin Resh Kaf, Erik, as in this Eriktology. Nun Kaf Vav Tav, treasure house or museum, which is also a synonym with Ayin Resh Kaf, Erik, as in Eriktology. We're going to break in just a couple minutes here. So what I'm saying is, I can go back and say Aleph Nun Kaf Yod means I will damage myself or plummet myself down to be damageable, discounted, afflicted, smitten, of contrite spirit, allow myself to be wounded. Why? That Kaf Yod could be read as why? Where are you, my? Remember, Yeshua said he came to seek the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So I can read in the word Anki as somehow self-referential of the one up in heaven. And we say whether it's Yahuwah, whether it's Yeshua before he was took on the human body, by taking on a human body, however he did that through being birthed of the mother Mary, going back to DNA, that's a whole other thing. We could talk about that later. But what I'm saying is, even Nicodemus said, we know you came from heaven, talking to Yeshua in John chapter 3 at night. He said, we've been watching you, and nobody can do the things you do unless Elohim is with him. And then Yeshua picked up the conversation and ran with it. But the point is, so we don't know what Nicodemus was actually coming to ask. It has to be surmised. For the great I, the ego, the one who's the source of everything, to somehow plummet himself down to, you might say, the snake pit, to where he's vulnerable of getting bit by us vermin, us humans, us nasty things that just tear him apart. What we do. He knew that, and yet he lowered himself down. And interestingly enough, the word Dalet, the fourth letter, is spelled Dalet Lamed Tav. And if you look at Dalet Lamed Lamed Dalal, it means to be hung down, poor, reduced, incompetency, in regard, bedraggled, in poverty. It plays into the Anki of saying, for the Almighty without a body, without a face, to put on the face of a human, Ben Adam, son of man, but Ben also means to be in the construct state, to take on the form, the building components of humanity, drop himself down to us, of contrite spirit, lame of feet, incapable, he won't even lift a finger to defend himself, and yet he came prepared and ready to show us the correct, true, accurate, right, and certain ways of the Torah, to open up and make available the treasure house of all his ways, but yet subject himself to be smitten and afflicted, and yet he himself would take that on as his mission. Yahweh, he will cause to exist. Elohim, I will for her toward. Hey Yod Kaf is the word how? How is it possible? How can this be imagined? That's what El Heka can be read as. I will do this for her. This is beyond comprehension. That's right. That's why so many people can't believe it. And that's all can be read in the word Anki Yahweh Eloheka. I'm Yahweh, your Elohim is the way it's translated. Okay, back to you there, Kurt.
That's just good stuff right there.